You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. It's Inside F1 with Joe Saward on Missed Apex. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners. So, let's be friends. There's 2 bits of Missed Apex admin before we get underway. There are now 5 spaces left on the Missed Apex karting on July 1st at Brighton Karting, and we are now accepting entries for the Missed Apex iRacing Renault 3.5 Cup. That's available on the website now. Karting is July 1st. And the iRacing is July 7th for round 1. Email me spanners@missedapex.net if you want to come racing with us. But on to the business of the show. Today I am joined once again by the most experienced F1 journalist in the galaxy, someone who's attended every F1 race since 1988. He devours team principles like Sonoda devours 11th place finishes. And he only stops the hunt occasionally to come to the shed to bring us inside F1. It's Joe Saward. How's it going, Joe?
Very good. Very good. I'm not sure I devoured too many team principles. I've spat a few out. But
Yes.
Mostly I get on well with them. They're all right. Most of them.
Who's
Some
your
of them.
favourite one?
I couldn't possibly comment, but no, I couldn't possibly comment. That would be subjective, wouldn't it?
Do they have as much time for you these days than, say, like the 80s when there was less media and maybe only a couple of TV channels? Now they're doing constant interviews. Do you find it harder to grab them?
No, not really. There is a difference nowadays, and that is that there are, in fact, not more journalists around, not written word journalists. There's more TV. Most of the written word journalists are my favourite kind of bottom feeders who are not there at all. So there are actually a very limited number of written journalists working in F1 in the paddock these days.
It's actually much harder to find reliable news sources now because on social media there's so many of what you call bottom feeders. And it seems like what they do is they scour German and Italian press for a rumour, get a quote, frame it as breaking news, and those things go viral, unfortunately.
I think the word you're looking for, which I use all the time, is extrapolation. They look at watch the telly, and they, as you mentioned, they look around the world for news using Google Translate. They don't fully understand what they're doing, and then they put their own spin on it, and exactly that. They put an exclusive, exciting, sensational headline on it, and that's it. And they live off the things, but they have no clue what's going on. So, at the end of the day, it's just clutter for everyone to get through. It is a problem for the proper reporters because it gets in the way, but it's not really, because at the end of the day, we've got the good stuff. They nick it, although they don't nick much of mine because I've scared a lot of them away by occasionally making up stories, and they all copy it. And I go, ha, made it up. And
well, that's not a good advert for your. You'll tell us if it's made up, right?
Well, I was going to say it's once every. I only did it. The last time I did it was years ago. And what you do is you change a number or something like that in a story, so that if they quote it, you can say, "Well, where did you get the number from?" And they went, my sources told me, well, no, they didn't, because I made that number up.
Oh, I see. Not like a wholesale, like Toto Wolff likes to eat dolphin meat. You don't just do that. But
No, you just do a little detail that they're going to use.
Yeah, and he eats 2 dolphins.
As a result of that, they don't tend to go near me because they're a bit frightened that I might bite their fingers.
Well,
so
yeah,
they still do it, but they tend to sort of quote me nowadays, so that I'm the one who gets in trouble if it's wrong.
And that's why we have your Uncle Joe, a superstar of F1 journalism, worthy of a fantastic and exciting intro with fireworks and everything and jet flyovers. And Mike, in our live chat, would like to know, did you enjoy the Miami Grand Prix driver introductions and associated razzmatazz?
Well, to be honest, I didn't see them because they all took place in front of the grid. And so the whole grid was behind this big wall. And all I could hear was some droning rapper, I think he was, droning on and on and on, which wasn't awfully exciting.
LL Cool J, Joe, come on.
I don't care who he was, but he was just droning on, and nobody was paying much attention. And the drivers didn't seem very excited. And I don't get it, but if that's what the Americans want, that's what the Americans can have. It's probably better than the last time when we had the very strange man in Texas sort of going, and here he is, ladies and gentlemen, the most incredible guy from Busted Flush, Illinois. This kind of rubbish. But if that's what they want, fair enough. I don't care. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what happens off track. It matters what happens on track. So, you can have dancing girls and fireworks. Dancing people and fireworks, if you like.
Well done, Joe. Honestly.
But well, they had dancing girls in Texas, which I didn't really understand. But I suppose not Texas. What's it called? Miami. But I don't. Apparently that's acceptable again now in North America. I don't know. I'm sure at Monaco we'll have a mixture of men, women, children, and animals, probably.
Just have beautiful people like the movies.
Well, Monaco is not as beautiful as you think. It's not, isn't it? Necessarily full of beautiful people. It might be full of a few plastic people. Because a lot of these beautiful people have to use plastic to stay beautiful, or at least they think they're staying beautiful, but in fact they're looking like nasty versions of themselves. Plastic surgery is horrid. Don't do it out there. All those people thinking of plastic surgery, don't do it. Natural things are better.
Next time Martin Brundle can't do the grid walk, you should volunteer to take his place. I think it would be a very different vibe. Right.
It would be a different vibe. I would go up and say, oh my God, that's horrible cosmetic surgery you've got there. That kind of thing. What the hell I'd be in the papers, I suppose.
You can do what you want as long as what happens on the track is good, and that's what's important. It hasn't been great, what's on track at the moment. We're looking at Imola.
Well, that's a matter of opinion, isn't it? You see, because
there we go.
I would dispute that. Baku was dull, I accept. It happens occasionally that you get a dull race, not usually in Baku, weirdly. I don't think Miami was dull, but I fully understand why people who watch it on telly don't see the full race. They only see the bit the telly wants to show you, which is what going to the races and being a spectator, and particularly what I do, which is lap charting. There's always something exciting. And there's a lot more things happening than you actually think, because the TV only shows you one particular section of it. So, I can see why it would get dull, but I know I don't feel races are that dull at all. So I know after every supposed dull race, there's always a period of when nobody's got anything to say, so they have a quick post-mortem about, we need more overtaking, the usual routine. Everything is based on what happened yesterday. So next week, if we have a great race, the whole overtaking issue will be forgotten. Then we'll go to Monaco and everyone will go, we'll never get any overtaking at Monaco.
It's rubbish, Monaco, though, isn't it, Joe? Come on, you could admit that.
No, it's not rubbish. Monaco is what it is. Boo. It is a fantastic event. You have to go and see these raving lunatics driving their very fast cars through tiny little streets. And it is like riding a bicycle around an apartment or threading the needle through every cliche you've ever heard is true, because it's stark raving bonkers. But, do you want them to overtake as well? No, can't have that. So qualifying is really exciting, and the race is generally done unless it rains. But, it's Monaco, and Monaco is part of Formula One. It's the way it is. It's a bit, if you turn it around the other way, you can have any number of overtakes in a NASCAR race, but when all is said and done, they'll throw a yellow at the right moment so they can have a rush to the finish. And it's all fake, as well as I do, it's fake. But it is the way it is. We don't do that. Not often, anyway.
Yeah. Red flags. I'm curious to see next time that there's an incident in the last few laps. I'm really, really curious to see whether they are pushing this red flag 2-lap sprint race concept over finishing under a safety car.
Of course they are, because all the teams, as we've been over this before, I'm sure, all the teams don't want to finish under yellow flags, which is quite correct. I agree with that. But, I also believe that we shouldn't have red flags unless we need, because if you have too many red flags, you end up with Australia's, which was rather ruined by all those red flags. So, somewhere along the line, there has to be, there's also, you've got to bear in mind as well that we had the incidents in Suzuka last year, where the race control got a bit frightened by stuff happening on the track, and so they tend to throw a red flag at every opportunity at the moment because they're not very relaxed about it. Because it was that was downright dangerous. I'm not saying it was race control's fault that there was a truck driving around in the rain, but it did have an impact on their thinking. So this year we've just seen a lot of red flags, and I think they need to relax a bit. And this is one of the things that when you have new people in new jobs, or new people in jobs and other people who are new looking in and deciding what's right and what's wrong, they tend to be a bit cautious. Whereas Charlie Whiting had been around forever and was willing to let things run. And also that made for a better show because he understood a little bit more about things. Now, at the moment, we're just going through this red flag phase, which is very tiresome, I have to say.
Yeah.
Particularly in practice and qualifying, when every single time anybody goes off, even if it's not very important, there's a red flag. So generally speaking, though, people they don't throw red flags for very silly instances, as long as the car's moving again. But they do have. I think there's too many red flags at the moment, but I think it's just a phase we're going through. So.
Before we go to some listener questions, just one on overcautious race control. Obviously, looking at the weather forecast for Imola, it's showing up on BBC at the moment as a 60% chance of rain, thundery showers. And so what we've noticed, though, in previous years is instead of going, oh, yay, there's going to be, some action in the wet, it's tended to be things like Spa and Monaco a couple of years ago, where they seem increasingly reluctant to get going. And it seems like they won't start a race on full wets.
Well, there's a reason for that, and it's got nothing to do with tyres. It's to do with aquaplaning. There's a certain level of rain that is reached, and when you reach that level of rain, the cars just go out of control. It's just the way they are. And it's to do with the height they run above the ground, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and aquaplaning, you just, you can't really afford to have that because people just go flying off everywhere because racing drivers being lunatics.
You can't tell them.
Just don't lift off. They just drive on until the world says, oh, wait, there's a law called physics, and bang, which is why they're racing drivers, probably, because otherwise, if you had cautious folk, they wouldn't be very interesting to watch, would they? So generally speaking, the inability to go racing is not about tyres. As we saw in Suzuka when they restarted there after all the incidents, it was extremely wet and they were still going for it. And this is when you saw the drivers at their best. So it's just to do with aquaplaning, that's all. And it's a call that the race director will generally make based on what he hears from the drivers as well. There's feedback all the time. So, they are they more cautious, the racing drivers of today? Probably a little bit. In keeping with the rest of the world, nobody can no one's allowed to voluntarily hurt themselves anymore. You're not allowed to be a loony.
I think they do probably need a little bit of protecting from themselves. And like we've noticed a trend with race control where things that used to just be double waved yellows, now I guess because they're really after every second, we get this kind of pattern where it's double waved yellows, safety car, red. And it seems to really happen in that kind of order now where they're like, okay, give ourselves just enough time to assess the situation and then boom.
But that's also based exactly on what you just said. It's based on reports coming in. So if somebody's hit the barrier and the barrier is needing repair, that's a red flag. If there is, like Alexander Albon in Australia, there was such a lot of junk on the track after he'd gone off, sand, stones, whatever. That was too much for a few brushes. So that was beyond a safety car. Hence, we had the red flag, which allowed a machine to come around with rotating brushes, whatever they're called, and sweep everything up. So, that's probably more efficient than trying to get a bunch of guys doing it with a safety car going around, because every time the safety car gets within 500 meters, coming towards them, they have to rush off the track. So in the end, it was probably quicker to have a safety car and restart. Teams are not particularly keen on having restarts, particularly standing ones, because there's moments of higher risk
madness
for everybody. It's not madness; it's just a way of doing it. But it's better than rolling starts, which basically achieve nothing at all. So, because a rolling start, nobody or rarely does anybody actually go into a rolling start and positions change unless you have a little bit of DRS. Oh, yeah, you're not allowed DRS with a safety car, right? So,
well, you can have a bit of chaos. If you remember when Bottas realised he was going to get out-dragged somewhere, I can't remember where, I think it might have been Hungaroring, but he realised he was going to get out-dragged if he went out of the last corner, so he slowed down all the way to the start-finish line, and the cars behind just didn't realise, and there was about 4 or 5 cars hit each other quite slowly
Well,
underneath the safety car.
we saw something like that going on, and they didn't hit each other so much. We saw that going on in Melbourne at one point, and we saw a very slow restart in Baku, I think. Maybe it was in the Formula 2 race. But there was certainly one where, I mean, they literally crawled to the line. And then, because again, if you're the front guy and you've got that much ability to slipstream, you're going to lose. It's a bit like the old days, slipstreaming at Reims or Monza, where you didn't want to be first going into the last corner because you would not win the race. So they'd all hang back. You'd have these sort of piles of cars at the last corner waiting for somebody to go for it. And everyone else would immediately leap behind them and out-drag them to the line. No, so it's just, it's a, people complain about DRS, but it's not very different to slipstreaming. It's just the physics is man-made as opposed to physics being physics.
A defender of DRS.
I'm not defending DRS. I'm just saying it's not the great evil that people make it out to be. It's a very clever solution to create slipstreaming when there isn't slipstreaming. There's nothing wrong with that.
Maybe I think if people framed it how you framed it, because I don't think many people talk about it in those terms of slipstreaming happens anyway, DRS exaggerates that. What they should call it, the slipstreaming.
I don't think it exaggerates it. What it does is it creates it when it's not necessarily there. Because you've got the aero disruption that used to be the problem. That it gets rid of aero disruption to some extent. So I honestly don't see a problem with it. I just think there have always been slipstreaming races and battles and tracks, and all this is a way of making that happen when it wouldn't normally be able to happen. I don't think it's a bad thing at all.
So it was a rant I was having to our Chris Stevens actually this morning. And I said, everything that everyone complains about in Formula One is to do with aero. So, the dirty air, having to use DRS, not being able to follow. And the only advantage is lap time. And then a disadvantage of more aero is the tracks are effectively, the corners are straightened out. Everything becomes quote unquote easier, less opportunities for, long braking zones to overtake. All of this would be solved by just ripping off the front and back wings, but it's never going to happen. But all the things people complain about are because of these big front wings and big rear wings.
I mean, it's just it's science, really. At the end of the day, it's the fault of science. You can't blame
curse you science
aerodynamicists. The other night, by accident, actually, because there was something really. Oh, that's right. The Eurovision Song Contest was on, and it was so awful.
So good. It was so good.
It was so awful that I changed channels and I chanced upon the IndyCar race from Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and it was duller than toast. I've got to tell you, they've got push-to-pass buttons. Now, I'm not a big fan of push-to-pass buttons because what's the point? People say it's the same as slipstreaming, da-di-da-di-da. Yeah, maybe it is. But, somebody goes past one lap, the other bloke goes past the other lap, and if you don't have enough bits and bobs, you can't do it the next time around. But it was really not very interesting. And they had so many pit stops because their cars won't go very far on all that sort of fuel they have to burn. And they have to change the tyres all the time. And I just got bored watching it. And I'm thinking I should be getting excited because everyone gets excited about IndyCar racing and I'm not. And it's not necessarily their fault. I mean, it's a one-make championship. Two manufacturers with some different aero, but at the end of the day, they kind of finished where they started, if you like, except if they made bad mistakes, and it wasn't that good, to be honest. So I'd much rather have Formula One because at least it kind of feels less artificial, if you like. Maybe that was just because it was Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course. I don't know. I'll probably upset a load of people now. So
yeah, email joe@internet.com. No, he's at Joe Saward on Twitter. I'm assuming you don't have your DMs open on Twitter. That would be a disaster for you, wouldn't it? I
think I do, actually, yeah. I wouldn't know how to turn them off, to be honest. I get messages occasionally, so I must have them turned on, mustn't I?
Go spam Joe, at Joe Saward on Twitter. And for the record, Finland were robbed. That was a jury stitch-up.
What, was Valtteri Bottas singing or something?
Eurovision. On to listener questions.
Oh, he would have been representing Australia these days, wouldn't he, with his mullet? And what is Australia doing in the Eurovision? Never mind.
No, let's go to the listener questions, because Eurovision, that could be a whole new podcast. Okay, this is a nice personal one from Adam S., who just asks, Joe, what track do you enjoy working at the most, and which one do you enjoy working at the least? It's a nice question.
Oh, that's actually a very good question. The least favourite is possibly Monaco because it's just
Told you.
difficult.
All right.
Yeah, it's difficult. The marshals are. Can I use the word? No, better not. Anyway, the word that begins with D and
Right.
ends in head.
We say turnips around here, Joe.
Oh, turnips, do they? Well, the marshals are turnips, and they've got this arrogant complex that the Automobile Club of Monaco has about how they know how to run races and nobody else in the world does, which is utterly absurd, as they obviously haven't been around the world enough to see that they are ancient history these days in the way they organize things. I think Formula One is beginning to kick them into some kind of shape at the moment, so that they learn that they're not the world's greatest motor race. But they've still got a long way to go. In terms of my favorite ones, what's my favorite one? I don't know. There's lots of nice, easy ones that I enjoy doing. Basically, anywhere that's got easy access to the paddock. If they put you in a tent on the wrong side of the racetrack, oh, hang on a minute, that's what we're going to do in Imola next week. Given that also a muddy car park after last year, there was a sort of Passchendaele version. But anywhere that the access is difficult, or where things are split up, I hate that. Where you have teams spread into 2 or 3 different places, so you can never find the people you're looking for. That's annoying. But otherwise, it's just wander into the paddock, have a nice time.
Excellent.
It would be nice to see racetracks. Some of the circuits have got this mad belief that journalists don't need to see what's happening on the racetrack. So what's the point of us being there at all, is my response to that. Obviously to talk to people, but it always helps to be able to see the racetrack, because you can be amazed by, look at those cars, they go jolly fast, don't they?
Mm. Yeah, and
look, that one's just crashed into the front of the Maserati building or whatever it is. Is it Bugatti they put at the final corner in Monaco this year? There's a new thing. When you go to Rascasse, you'll see a great big new Bugatti building there. Which will look very flash compared to the old ship Chandlers that used to be there for 100 years.
Well, I won't, because I'll be in a shed as usual, Joe. Sorry,
I'm not going to be. You can watch from TV. You know, there's that black box thing. You know what I mean?
Well, there we go. Thank you, Adam. That's a great question. I did not expect that would lead to Joe agreeing with me that Monaco's rubbish. Finally, after all these years, Jared asks, "What's wrong with McLaren this year, Uncle Joe? If you were CEO of McLaren, what would you do to fix it?"
If I were CEO of McLaren, I would probably load a pistol.
Jeez,
that's unkind, isn't it?
A little. Joe at Internet.
What would I do? Well, first thing I'd do is I'd change the technical staff a little bit, because obviously there's a problem with the car. It's not as good as the others. And they've sort of done that already. But it's very hard to get new people, and it's very hard to get new people in a hurry. And it's very hard to get new people if your team is not showing much in the way of potential. So, this is one of the problems. It's one of the problems that a lot of teams have. Ferrari has the same problem. Who the hell wants to go to Italy and walk into a crossfire, which is what's going on at the moment? So they're struggling to find people. And if you want the best people, you've got to have the best environment in which they can work. And that's a problem. So, I mean, Woking's very nice, and the quality of the stuff they've got down there is good. But it does seem to be a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Disjointed at the moment. I think it needs a bit of clarity as to. I mean, I quite like the look of Stella. I don't know him very well, but he seems to be getting the hang of some of the things that need to be done. But of course, it just takes time. And that's, this is the same thing. I'm sure we'll get around to Alpine at some point. It's the same thing at Alpine. You've just got to have time. And if you're the boss or the CEO of Alpine, Mr. Laurent Rossi, has arrived thinking that things will change overnight if he shouts at people, that's possibly not the right approach. But, maybe it'll work.
Can I ask here, Laurent Rossi, he was originally, wasn't he sort of in line to do the team principal job at some point? and then
No,
no,
not really.
or did he want to do
No,
it?
no, he's the CEO. He's got far too many things to
Ah,
worry about to be a full-time team principal, which is why he hired Otmar. And now Otmar hasn't achieved the start to the season that they want to see, and so he's basically telling Otmar that the team's rubbish, which is not necessarily the right way to do it. But who am I to lecture the CEO of Alpine, who has other things to worry about? He's got a bit of a challenge on his hands. I don't know if you know the Alpine plan. They produce 3,500 cars a year,
yeah.
and the project is to produce 150,000 cars a year by 2030. So he's got a lot of work to do. He's also got to find people to buy all these cars that he's going to produce. Personally, I think it's madness. But they've done a very good deal now with AutoNation in America, which is a second-hand car dealership with 300 outlets, and they will basically sell Alpine. So he doesn't need to be in league with another manufacturer or open a whole bunch of dealerships because he's got AutoNation going to do it for him.
I was just looking. I've never seen.
He's a clever guy.
Yeah,
a very clever guy, but he doesn't necessarily know the intricate ways of running things in Formula One.
It was nice and public, though, isn't it? That's always a bit of a red flag. It's a real public dressing down.
Yeah, but it's a bit like me wandering into I don't know, an automobile show and saying, "Well, you're not doing that right, are you?" I have absolutely no qualification to do that. I could do it if I wanted to. I could write about, I went to this car show and all the cars were lined up wrongly. It doesn't make any sense. What are these half-naked ladies doing? We don't do them anymore, do we? Things like that. It is, it's best to do what you're good at. And to try and do things you're not good at, but think you might be good at, is not necessarily a good idea.
I used to have an editorial policy on this podcast. I'll give up. Between you and Christian Pedersen, there's no point. It's just too much work. Right, let's move on. Let's move on a little bit because I got distracted there looking up Alpine road cars because I don't think I've ever seen one. They look a bit weird.
No, they're beautiful, beautiful things, usually in blue.
Yeah.
And they look like Alpines from the 1970s.
I'd prefer a Porsche.
And if you want the full details, they wouldn't exist were it not for Caterham cars having put some money up to convince Renault to go in league, and then Caterham pulled out, and so Renault kept the project.
Fascinating. Well, there you go. Check out a Renault. Or would you prefer a Porsche? As Stuart Neal asks, have Porsche just given up on F1 now?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Not normally that quick.
They might they might do something in the background with somebody, but I doubt it because they haven't got the wherewithal to do it at the moment, and they're behind the game because Audi got there first, even if they are the sister company. There's a weird relationship between Audi and Porsche that nobody can really understand. They're supposed to be sister brands, but they hate each other with a passion and would kill one another easily enough. So no, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Having said that, if somebody came to them with a pile of money and they had time to do it, they might do something. But they're a little bit behind the game now because they haven't got the time.
And they were just looking to sort of take over and co-opt an existing entity, weren't they? No one's seriously thinking about starting an F1 team from scratch anymore.
What do you mean?
Like, would someone come in and go...
Manufacturer?
Yeah, someone's going to come in and go, I'm going to build my factory.
Cadillac's, by the look of it, with Andretti, obviously. There's... The thing that people in Formula One don't understand about the car world is that car manufacturers have got lots more technology than the average Formula One team does. Formula One teams think, we've got the best this, we've got the best that. But, entire car dynamic simulation and things like that, Formula One teams, if there are any, it's very rare. Whereas car manufacturers got loads of them, and simulation technologies and all the rest of it. They've got lots of capability. They've got hundreds of people working in battery development, whereas Formula One teams might have 4 or 5. So there's a whole lot of stuff that can be fed into Formula One from manufacturers. The problem comes when a manufacturer thinks they know how to do Formula One, because inevitably they don't, and they make a mess of it because they think they have a a sense of superiority because they're big companies and they're very successful usually, but they don't know how to do Formula One. And they all make the same mistakes. And you hear it and you laugh and you go, oh, always wait for the next one. And somebody else will come in and do the same thing again. Thus far, I have to say, Cadillac is not making noises like that. But I think they will eventually come in with their own engine. I think they have to in order for Andretti to get an entry.
I wonder if F1 is guilty of that in general, like you said there, of assuming that because it's a glamorous sport and the fastest track car in the world around round corners and bends, that they have the highest skill level of engineering and technology, and that there's actually a lot of parts of F1 where they're borrowing technology from other fields, and actually it's quite a limited pool of people. Yes, they're the specialists, but there's not actually that kind of wealth of people that know and understand F1 enough to drive it forward and let it catch up with, say, things like, defense or automotive.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. What happens is that they suck in very, very good people from lots of different worlds, including defense. And they take the ideas often out of aviation and they apply them to cars. And so within the very narrow restrictions that there are within Formula One, they are the best people, probably. But, if you put a Formula One person into a big car company and told them to fix a problem, they probably wouldn't be the right people to do it. But vice versa, if you put a CEO of an automotive company into a Formula One situation, they definitely wouldn't know how to do it because we've seen it done too many times. So, I don't think you should underestimate what Formula One does and its ability to innovate. But I do think that that car companies need to be very careful that they don't screw up.
All right. Well, let's stick with teams for a bit. I didn't think that question would get as much mileage as that, Stuart. Thank you very much. Always nice to have a glimpse into the relationship that F1 has within the wider engineering, economic, and political world. It can't be a bubble always. Now, without suggesting that anyone do anything bad to themselves, Uncle Joe, the next question is: how is James Vowles doing?
Well, James Vowles is doing very well.
Nah, he seems nice.
If you look at the he's a jolly sensible chap. I mean, he's perfectly qualified to be a team principal, and he seems to be doing all the right things. He's not shouting at people. He's not making wild claims. To be fair, Alex Albon and Logan Sargent are doing far better than they were expected to do. Certainly in qualifying. We've seen Williams is in Q3, for goodness sake. Think about that for a minute. It's quite remarkable. Yeah, you're looking it up, aren't you, to make sure I'm right?
I was actually, I was actually looking up the quote from James Vowles recently, where he sort of said that Logan Sargent might need to kind of tighten up a little bit. So it shows you that the standards are high, because I didn't think Sargent had done that badly. He looked really racy on occasion, but I think
he didn't do a bad job at all this year. But he had he had a very bad race in Miami. But that doesn't mean you're judging everybody on the last race. Everyone's saying Nick de Vries, he's had a couple of bad races, therefore he's in the skip, and they're going to put Daniel Ricciardo. Well, Daniel Ricciardo had a whole season of bad races. Why would they put him back in there? There is this tendency, and it's driven by the loonies on the web, of reacting to everything that happened last weekend and then forgetting it 5 days later. So, I don't think what we're seeing at Williams is a slow process of identifying the people they want and then going out to get them. Now, we will start to see that happening in the months ahead. You'd want to be seeing somebody picked to be the new technical director sometime soon. But having said that, if you're looking for the right person, not necessarily the right person by a certain date, you've got different options available to you. So it might be best to say, well, actually, we're looking for a technical director who will make sure we're all right in 27, as opposed to caring too much about 24. So there's lots of elements to it, but it's because they're not going to fix the problem in 24. They're not going to make Williams a winner again in 24. They might be able to do it from 27 onwards. And that's the thinking you have to have. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand, which is you can't just turn a team around in 10 minutes. Now, if you're Lawrence Stroll and you have all the money in the world, you can turn it around in 3 years. But he's still not winning, is he? And he's not going to win this year, even with Fernando Alonso. Certainly there's only one car team. But, with Fernando Alonso, who finishes every race 30 seconds behind, everyone goes, isn't he fantastic? He's finished third 27 times. Yeah, he has finished third 27 times, but it's not going to win unless the two Red Bulls collide with each other, is he? So, and even then it's not guaranteed, because Ferrari might even manage to get a car to the finishing line, or Mercedes will be there. Or perhaps one day Alpine will be in the game too. So, the fact is that it takes a long time. It takes an awful lot of money, and it takes a lot of commitment and finding the right people. And they're all trying to do that. And that's the hard bit.
Well, look, people don't know this, and I know you don't really like to talk about it, but you and Lawrence Stroll, you often, you go to a tequila bar in Monaco together. It's basically their Friday night thing. I'm not going to pry any further than that, Joe, but I know you have the inside scoop at Aston Martin.
No, I don't. I'm not interested. I am not one bit interested in anything that Lawrence Stroll says, to be honest. He's just there. He owns the team. It's his money he's burning. That's his problem. But in terms of, would I trust anything he said? Not really, no.
Because, yeah, and you have to, though, when you've got someone like Lance Stroll in there.
You can talk to people around who know what really is going on.
Oh, no, I meant
people who just spout things.
I meant Lawrence Stroll. I don't think he's going to come out in there and go, yes, my son, he's being shown up by Fernando, and we're going to have to do something about that. You might find that Fernando's car starts having issues. But how? That was spot on. That was better than I expected it was going to be. Not practiced at all. But he, at some point...
But Fernando is being utterly ridiculous at the moment, which is fine. Good for him for trying at least. He's being totally obsequious and saying, things like, oh, super overtake there by Lance. I saw it on the TV when I was driving around, which makes him look very cool because he can watch TV while driving Grand Prix. And it makes Lance sound great. And the other day he said Lance is a world champion material. Well, really? Can I have some of what he's been smoking, please? It's not true. He's saying that because he wants to keep his drive. And if he says bad things about his teammate, like my teammate's not good enough and it's holding the team back, if he says that, Lawrence is not going to be a happy bunny, is he? No. So at the end of the day, Aston Martin Racing is it's a vanity project, isn't it? One way or the other, because I have no idea why they took on the Aston Martin road car company, because it's not T-shirts, it's not selling fashion. It's a heavy industry, and it's going to cost them a fortune. And it's always been an unsuccessful car company. And why is it going to change now just because some fashion magnates got hold of it? I don't get it. And why has he got hold of it? So that his son can have a Formula One team, because he can't actually get a drive elsewhere. Let's be brutally honest about this. Even with all the money they've got, he's in year, 6 or 7 of Formula One now.
Yes, fair bit.
He's had every chance. Everybody else gets 2 years. Even Mick Schumacher got 2 years and then got slung out because he wasn't good enough. But Lance is still there. So what does that tell you? It's a problem because it does hold back a racing team.
Wow.
And another thing.
And another thing, you clouds. Why do you taunt me, clouds? I think, my son, he's not very good at remembering to drink water. So we have various alarms on his watch. So it'll come up and it'll go water. I'm sure Alonso has one of those, mid-race, is praise Stroll. Give Stroll advice. Just to, because by clockwork, he seems to do it once or twice during a Grand Prix. But there we go.
But it is, I suppose it's a clever way of staying in with the boss. But ultimately, when push comes to shove and they're going into a corner side by side, unlikely though that may be, but Alonso is Alonso. He's deep down an animal, and he is somebody who wants to win. And is he going to back off for the boss's boy? Well, we'll see. I hope not, because he's no longer the animal if he backs off for the boss's boy. He's just a devious person who is going to let Lance get ahead once. I mean, Lance is just not there. Sorry. He's quick over one lap. I'll give him that.
All right. Yep. That's Joe said that, not me. Getting DM Joe. Right. DM Joe. We'll get on with some more listener questions, Joe. But I just wanted to make sure people don't miss out on the opportunity to catch your blogs. The Green Notebook is a fantastic, almost like travel log. of you going around the world. And, of course, you have the GP Plus magazine, which is a PDF.
Hang on. The Green Notebook is more than a travelogue. It's a travelogue with all the really good stuff in it.
No, it's about what crisps you had at the airport.
No, but that's also true. It's about traveling the world, but it's also about what's really happening in Formula One. It's a news column. It's disguised as a travelogue.
I like the bit where like, I had to wait for 8 hours and I had some crisps. That's my favourite bits of that.
Yeah, well, that's part of the game, isn't it? That's what we do, good. I'm just describing life as on the Formula One scene because lots of people would like to do it.
If I may give you a compliment, right? A lot of the journalism we get now, it stops you in the street, basically. It's like a street performer. It stops you in the street and says, hey, read this. And you go, oh, I'm angry now. What I would say about that, what I call the travelogue, is it's appointment reading. So I go, okay, this is when I sit down and I read that. It's a proper bit of writing rather than Horner slams Marco into a sewer grate. Yeah, so I'll go. I'll recommend Joe's Green Notebook, and you and I are hooking up
which is on Joe Blogs F1,
Joe Blogs
isn't
F1. It? There we go. Just search for Joe Blogs F1, and you'll find all his stuff. But we are trying to find a date after Barcelona for one of the virtual live audiences, which have been very much enjoyed. So look out for that. I'll get that out on our social media as soon as we've planned that. But also check out GP Plus magazine, which is like a PDF. It's on a wax tablet. Every week on a wax tablet, you do a race review, but it's got loads of other great stuff in there.
And also, there's also the JSPM newsletter where the really good stuff is, which is one of those old-fashioned PDFs as well, which comes out every Monday morning and is all the good scoops that doesn't all go into the Green Notebook. So if you really want to know what's going on in the industry, and lots of the teams read it, not just in F1, but also on the other side of the pond and also in Australia, all over the world, people read that one because they want to know what's going to happen.
Nice. Let's get on with some listener questions. Ooh, where should we go? Ooh, because you touched upon Nick de Vries, Paul Johnson is asking, what's your take on Nick de Vries and what has gone wrong with him so far? Why isn't his stellar drives as a stand-in for an Albon, why hasn't that translated to performance and results this year?
Okay, well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that Nick de Vries is a lucky chap because the one race where he stepped in for Alex Albon was the one race where the Williams was going to be stellar. And if Albon had driven that car that weekend, I'm sure he would have done better than Nick de Vries did. But he didn't, because Albon is the unluckiest racing driver in the world. Everything always goes wrong for him. So Nick was lucky. That propelled him into the seat he's got, in part helped by the fact also that Alonso messed up the market by moving off to Aston Martin, opening up a space at Alpine for Gasly. So as a result of that. Now, the other thing that people have missed, I think, this year is that Yuki Tsunoda is doing a hell of a lot better than people think he is. And it's because the car's not particularly good. He's not showing up as being as good as he is, but he's beginning to look like a proper, serious, reliable talent.
Oh, I hope so.
Which in the past, he's had the talent, he's had the speed, but there have been lots of things wrong with him. It's taken him a long time to learn, but he is looking very, very good now. And he's a very solid performer this year, if you look at the way things have gone within the restrictions of that car. And so I think that Nick has arrived in a situation and found that Yuki Tsunoda is not the pushover he thought he was going to be. And Nick, he's got a lot of talent, but Formula One's more than talent.
I'm a Tsunoda fan. I want Tsunoda to do well. I love his passion. I like his approach to racing. And I don't mind him on the radio. I don't think he's by far the worst person when it comes to team radio. If Raikkonen did much worse and he was considered like, oh, he's so funny, isn't he, Raikkonen, screaming for his steering wheel. So I feel like he's been unfairly treated in that way. But here's my fear is that what if, because Tsunoda was a step behind Gasly, what if the car isn't as bad as it looks and it's just Tsunoda hasn't taken a step up and actually De Vries really isn't hitting the ground running either? It could be that the car's not that bad and you've got a driver pairing that's not sparking. And I hope that's not true. I hope that car is trash and Tsunoda is getting every ounce out of it. But it's hard to tease that apart.
Well, I think that the engineers will know the answer to that question because they have data. which shows you how good the car is. I haven't sat down there and read through all the data, but the impression I get from within the team is that the car is the problem, not the drivers.
Interesting.
So I think that's probably quite likely because, teams mess up. That's what happened occasionally. Look at McLaren. Look at Mercedes. Look at Ferrari, come to that. In fact, look at everybody apart from Red Bull.
From Red Bull. They should have just spent more money, Joe. That's the thing.
No, it's not about money. It's about the ability to use the money in a sensible fashion. Everybody says it's all about money. It's not. Look at Toyota. They spent more money than everybody, and they were a complete and utter bust. So why was that? The Ford Motor Company, disastrous. Jaguar Racing days. Why was that? It's not about the money.
Okay.
It's about using the money.
What a quick follow-up on Tsunoda. Why has he got... I feel like he's actually got a bit more of a chance than a lot of Red Bull juniors would have gotten. Under a weight of criticism, but they've stuck with him.
Why do you think that is?
Honda.
Oh, goodness me.
Hang on a minute. I got told Honda were out of Formula One, and that's why we needed an engine freeze, because it's Red Bull powertrains, and it's nothing to do with Honda, Joe. So it can't be Honda, can it?
But it is to do with Honda, isn't it? It's obviously still to do with Honda, because that's just the way it is. And he's had more time. He's also quick. You got to bear that in mind. He's not a fool. He's quick, but he's flawed. And Honda have got until 2026, they are involved in Formula One to a lesser or greater extent. So it makes sense. Red Bull has 4 drives available, and they make a horrible job with all their juniors. So, why don't they just use a Honda junior who might be useful? Politically, it's a very sensible thing to do. And the fact that they have to bring in somebody who's not a Red Bull junior sometimes, quite often actually, is because their program is such rubbish. So, there's far too much pressure placed on young drivers in the Red Bull scheme. They are judged every week. They fall in and out of favor. They don't get much support. Marco's right in a way, in that drivers shouldn't need too much support, but some of them need some. You can't just hope that everybody is strong enough to take a battering when things aren't going right. And nowadays, of course, everyone's so hung up on mental health issues and all this sort of stuff.
As they should be, Uncle Joe, as they should be.
I'm not suggesting that they should or shouldn't be. What I'm saying is it doesn't help young drivers. The fact is that if you look at the other schemes, there's a lot more support for them. But honestly, how did the world ever survive without all these crisis management teams rushing to people's aid? How did we ever do it? How do we get through all this stuff? How do we go through wars? I don't know. Without cancelling, how do we do it?
Well, that's us cancelled. Good. Well, that's the last ever Inside F1. We're with Uncle Joe.
No, but it's a perfectly valid point.
I honestly, I think my serious answer to that is that things were worse. Things were worse.
Yeah, maybe.
And now we're trying to make them
but
better.
We still got through it, didn't we? So
yeah, I don't want to just get through. I want to thrive, not just survive.
Okay.
Very good. F1 in Japan
thrive away?
Will F1 in Japan thrive if Tsunoda gets promoted to Red Bull?
F1 in any country thrives if the driver or a driver from that country is successful. If we have a driver from the United States of America who is successful, F1 will thrive more than it is thriving already. If we have a successful driver from South Africa, there will be a South African Grand Prix. There are very clear elements that make this all obvious, really. I mean, if it's possible to find a woman Formula One driver, we will have a huge, bigger audience of ladies. Perfectly reasonable.
Well, F1 Academy's launched.
Yeah, I know, but it's a long, long process. It's not just stick him in a car and see who's good. You've got to find the right people. You've got to nurture them the right way. You've got to give them time. You've got to give them things they haven't got. It's really a long time process. And I don't think people realize that unless you get a really exceptional person coming along, it's not going to happen overnight. And it's not because nobody wants it to happen. Believe me, everybody in Formula One wants to have a female driver in Formula One because they realize it's good for the sport. And the sooner we can find one, the better. But you can't find them that easily. And that's the problem. And that's true of engineers right across the board. Gradually we're getting more and more. But the qualified, if you read people talking about this, they all say the same thing, and I can attest to it, which is qualified people, there aren't enough candidates because they just don't exist at the moment. They will in time when they have the right kind of training programs and mentoring schemes and all these things you need. But right now we don't. But it's not because we don't want it.
No, good. Oh, you got through that.
Without causing any trouble. I didn't even mention the fact that if you really want to be a female in motorsport,
Joe,
the best thing to do is to be a TV commentator, really.
And that will change over time. And there's been reports that
you reckon there'll be more men coming in the future?
I think that there has been a lot more women watching Formula One, and I think the statistics that have been bandied about from F1 certainly seem to be reflecting that. So long may that continue. There's some listener questions, Joe, that aren't related to any potentially thorny topics at all. And Maria, a lady, in our Slack group, is asking, is the current Mercedes...
How presumptuous of you to suggest that it might be a man called Maria. How do you know?
Maria, the human being called Maria, is the current Mercedes mostly an Allison-led concept, presuming its inception was made before James went to the CTO post, hence the switch of roles. Mercedes is, I think, quite transparent generally, but the narrative for this switch feels like it's a bit lacking.
Well, I think James answered that one himself the other day by saying it's simplistic to suggest that one person makes a difference in a car. It takes an awful lot of, there's 1,000 people working there producing a car, and the fact that one person stays or goes isn't necessarily the reason it's successful or not. So, yes, he was involved in things. So was Mike Elliott. The fact they switched jobs, it's just a different... it's just a different way to manage the way people have talents that are important. James's talent is, as they've said, as the man in the trenches leading the troops, and he's very good at that. He's an inspirer, an inspirational guy, whereas Mike is perhaps not as inspirational, but he's very clever and can think in a very clear and intellectual way. So, there are some people who are good at strategy and some people who are good at leadership. And I think that's what it's all about. And as to the actual impact on the car, well, we will see in time if that group of people can produce a better car, which I think they probably will.
I think the transparency is interesting. And why would they tell us each and every decision as it goes? But I got the feeling that the decision was really made race one. And everything since then has just been carrying on as normal, while in the background they've bringing this concept in. But it seems from Wolf's comments,
everybody seems to know who made the decision, and nobody seems to accept what the team says, which is that it was done by an internal process of thinking about what was best for the team. You can say I fall for that argument if you like, but I actually believe that's the case because that's how they work. And I think that, and that's why they've been successful, because there's no delusion going on. They're going, well, this is failing. Why is it failing? What can we do to make it better? So I don't follow this sort of cult of personality, if you like, in all cases. Adrian Newey has flaws too, He's surrounded by a whole bunch of very good people who adapt his inspirational thinking to make it successful. And sometimes maybe the inspirational thinking doesn't come from Adrian Newey. It might come from some of the others.
No, we don't know their names. They don't matter. They're all called Derek.
Well, we do actually, if you want them. But
yes. Shout out to some of the Red Bull design team.
Well, the Rob Marshalls of the world, the Pierre Vachets, I'm trying to remember his Balbo, the aerodynamicist. I think it's Enrico or Enzo. I can't remember which. He'll be very upset if he listens to this, which I doubt he does, but you never know. There are strength in depth because they get every so often the other teams go to Red Bull and nick everybody they can get their hands on.
Yeah.
And then another generation rise to the top and they get nicked as well. So, it's just the way it is. And Mercedes is a little bit the same, but Mercedes has a slightly different, more inclusive sense of unit which is why they tend to lose fewer people, because this is why they've been world champions for so long, because they've held it together. They also have contracts which are quite complicated to escape from as well, if you wanted to. But if they don't want you, you can get out quite easily.
All right. Well, a personal question from me: are the upgrades going to work?
I have no idea. Let's wait and see.
Guess.
Well, how am I supposed to guess?
I don't know. You talk to people. How happy do they seem?
Well, to be honest, I haven't talked to them about that because I don't think anybody knows. All you can know is whether or not it's an improvement on what you've had before. They seem to think that is. But is it an improvement when compared to everyone else's improvement? Because Formula One is constantly improving week after week. So we don't know. Let's see. Maybe not. I can't say.
I think it's basically it's a race one car, isn't it? And whilst everyone's waiting for this magic bullet, it's effectively this is what they wished they would have had in Bahrain if they could go back in time.
Might be. Who knows? I mean,
I was hoping
it's easy to. Well, yeah, but sometimes you can't make it up. You can make it up. It's easy. You just join the internet clutter and say this is the answer. But we don't know the answer quite often, and to say we do is delusional. So we can guess. Maybe we're right. Maybe we're wrong.
Okay, I'm going to guess then because Joe said I could. I'm going to guess. It's brilliant. Okay, good. And we've got time
but it still probably won't. It won't be brilliant enough to make up the 30 seconds.
No,
they are
I'd
30 seconds a lap. 30 seconds a race. They are behind Red Bull.
Yeah, I'd given up on that, but I did sort of get this feeling that Aston Martin is still Alonso is still there in that position. I think I said it after the Miami review. Not by default, but there is a gap ahead of them where there should be a Ferrari and a Mercedes. I think the season will be much more interesting if Mercedes and Ferrari can work their way back into that gap.
Maybe. The other thing is, remember, I mean, we were talking about money and knowing how to use it, but you've also got to have enough money. Now, where, for example, Alpine has suffered in the past is they have a much smaller budget than the big guys. So even if they know how to use it, you might say they've been using it very effectively to be where they've been in the past. But they are, it's a very small budget, which is why they're selling a percentage of the team to get more money in so that they can invest in things they need.
Excellent. Joe, I actually do, like with all my shows, stick to our strict hour time limit. So I think we've got just enough time for two things. One, Rob Ashley is a big fan. He's saying, can you wish him a happy birthday for turning 40? That's Rob Asher.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. That would be a while ago now.
No, but he wants you to wish him a happy birthday for turning 40.
I see. Sorry. I was thinking you were wishing me a happy birthday. Yes, happy birthday. Have a wonderful time.
I should have pre-warned you about that.
40 is jolly fun.
Yeah.
I won't tell you what I was doing my 40th birthday, but it was very naughty.
Oh, well, please don't. There's been quite enough trouble. If you keep hearing big cuts and skipping audio in this podcast, it's because I've taken the knife to it. And let's see. And this is quite a nice one from Sam, who just says, Joe, what's your highlight of the season so far? What have you liked?
What do I like so far this season? I just think we've had I like to see excellence. Okay. And I like the way in which the Red Bull works. I like the way in which Max Verstappen drives it. He's been quite unlucky, actually. People are far too busy banging the drum saying Sergio Perez is a championship contender when clearly he's not.
Vamos, Checo.
Yes, Vamos, Checo is all very well. It gives you a bit of a buzz and all the rest of it. But the bottom line is that Max Verstappen's way ahead of him. So I like to see excellence, and I've really enjoyed Max doing well. I don't enjoy people not doing well because, you kind of feel their pain. There are some people I don't particularly like, so feeling their pain is, slightly enjoyable. But, as a general rule, I hate to see people suffering, if you like. We're in this game not just to make money. We're in this game to race and to have fun. And, I like to see people having fun. And when Max Verstappen wins a race, he might play it down and pretend that he's not overly happy, but he's delighted every time he wins a race. And every time he doesn't win a race, he's not so delighted. So it's just human beings, really. And that's sometimes forgotten in Formula One, is that we are all human beings. We all have feelings. all that sort of stuff. Am I allowed to weep now?
Now here's a long list of people who Joe would enjoy seeing suffering. No, we can't do that because we are out of time. Go and search for Joe Blogs F1. We'll put links to his stuff in our show notes as well. And keep an ear out because we will tell you when the next virtual audience with Joe Saward will be. Joe, thank you so much for your time. Pack your brolly for Imola, and thanks for joining us in the shed.
I'm taking gumboots as well, because after last year's mud bath, gumboots are a good idea.
Join us at 8 p.m. on Sunday as we review the Imola Grand Prix live with Matt, me, Christian, and Alex Van Gien. But wherever we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast.
Are you successfully controversial enough for you?
The last ever Missed Apex Podcast. No, do you know what? I was holding my breath a lot, Joe, but we got through it. I call that personal growth and progress. I'm very proud of you, Uncle Joe.
Well, we get through it every time. I try not to get into fights anymore. So.